Slow down, you move too fast. Gotta make the morning last. Kicking down the cobblestones. Looking for fun, feeling groovy. Ba-da-da-da-da-da-dum, feeling groovy.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the bridge. We are on episode 117. So we're excited, and we have two great people with us today, Jolene Danielson and Robbie Price. Both of these ladies have been on our podcast before, but Robbie is playing a new role today. She's being my guest co-host because Sandy took the summer off, and Jolene is on because she let us know that she's got a new venture going on and she wants to tell us about it, plus kind of update us on what's going on. So let's start with Robbie. You have a quote for us.
I do. And in honor of our theme today, the essential joy of being with horses is that it brings us in contact with the rare elements of grace, beauty, spirit, and freedom. And that quote is by Sharon Rawls Lemon.
Oh, awesome. So, Robbie, before I forget, will you text that to me so I can get it in our notes?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. So, Jolene, welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to have you back. And tell us what's going on. Kind of update us. It's been probably, 6 or 8 months since we've talked?
I think so. I think it might even be a little bit longer. Yeah, it feels like maybe it's been a year. I'd have to go back and look at my calendar when we spoke last. But yeah, it's been a minute.
Well, welcome. We're glad you're back. And I've got 2 or 3 people on my list to contact with updates, and you were the top on my list. So that is so wonderful. So tell us, update us on what's going on in your wonderful life.
Yeah, sure, of course. So I'm trying to remember back. I think the last podcast that we did, I remember I was a financial coach using my accounting background within coaching because I completely fell in love with coaching and I couldn't believe I could get paid doing something I love. And so I realized through receiving my own coaching and my coaching partner practices, I had done, I think at this point, 7 financial workshops, and I had done many clarity sessions with potential clients, and nothing was working. And I couldn't understand why. And this fellow coach of mine, who is becoming a good friend also, she had straight up asked me, "Do you even want to be a financial coach?" And that was when I kind of sputtered over my words and I was defensive. And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, it would be cool. And I love to help people and this and that, right? But then I realized in my body when I was defending myself that it didn't really feel in alignment. And so that was, I think, around last year. I think it would have been July, August, maybe a little bit later that happened. Mm-hmm. And I kept telling myself that I should be using my accounting background. I should be using what I went to school plus worked almost a decade for, right? And then I just realized that it wasn't what lit my heart on fire. And I realized it was kind of a weird time because my social media had really grown from when I had shared a story about my 34-year-old horse, Maya. And I brought her home. All of her herd mates had passed away. And so she was the last of her herd. And so I had brought home another horse named Claire that I adopted for her to be friends with. And so that video went super viral, got millions of views. And so all of a sudden I had all of these people who were following me for my horses, but I was a financial coach. And so I realized it was like a, square hole or round hole, square peg, like it just wasn't working. And so after doing a lot of reflecting and dreaming, I realized that my heart has always been with horses, and I was finally giving myself the permission to step into my wildest little horse girl dreams. And so I finally pivoted from being a financial coach to starting to do healing work and coaching with my horses. And then during that time and doing my own work and sharing the healing powers that the horses have and the wisdom that they have, and I realized that a dream that I had always had was when I was scrolling through Facebook, I had come across a picture of the most beautiful horse I'd ever seen, and it was a wild Mustang. And that was something that I remembered. I remember being like 13 years old, and I remember hearing about how you could adopt a Mustang for as little as $125. And that little girl dream and that spark, when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is on my heart. I have the space, the time, my business is now built around horses. And so I completely stepped into my wildest dreams of bringing home two completely wild, untouched Mustangs. And so that's what I've been spending a lot of my time is gentling them and also figuring out what kind of horsemanship I want to embody and learn. And my old horse, Maya, who's 34, she's been such a great teacher for them. She is very wise and peaceful and loves to just come over and love on them. And so that has been really cool to watch. And Maya, it's been so new for me because Maya came to me as like the most perfect child-friendly horse. So going from that to now I have to learn the skills of how to train a horse to have that inner safety, which is honestly exactly what I do as a coach. I help people come to their inner safety. And so doing the same work with wild horses has been such a privilege.
Oh, wow. That is wonderful. Well, one of the highlights that I remember in talking when we talked last was what a natural born entrepreneur you are. And so you've taken your love of horses and healing, and then you merged it with your wildest dreams, the Mustangs. And now you're entrepreneuring, learning all sorts of things that are going to branch off into other loves. That is just absolutely fantastic. And I love the way you talked about how you self-reflected and said, what am I doing? This isn't what makes my heart sing.
Exactly.
So Robbie, I'm going to give the floor to you for a second because I think you've got something bubbling.
So, Jolene, I was like, really loved how you expressed how horses have these healing powers and this wisdom. And so I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about that. What are some of their healing powers? And what is some of the wisdom that they have imparted to you and that maybe you think that they can impart to others?
Ooh, I like that. Yeah. So I'll share a little bit about how I came to feel it for myself when I was, so a little background. When I was 3 years old, my mom shoved cowboy boots on my feet and pushed me out the door. And my dad and my grandpa drove us what felt like forever away, but it was just like an hour drive to up near Vancouver, Washington area, which is where my grandpa was buying two horses. And at this point, at 3 years old, I was already drawing horses on like everything and, having horse stickers on everything that I had and just completely obsessed with unicorns and all things horse related. And so when I went with my dad and my grandpa, I got to ride a horse for the very first time that day. And that same horse was who my grandpa brought home. And so it was Maya and then her son Diablo. And so he brought those two horses home. And so from the ages of 3 to 7, my only birthday wish was to go ride Maya. That's all I wanted to do. And so that's what we would do every single year. And then when I was 7, my grandpa ended up passing away pretty suddenly of cancer. And so from that experience, my family ended up moving into his farmhouse. And when my grandpa's funeral was the first one that I ever went to. And it was the first experience I had knowing someone who passed away. And at 7, even now at 30, I really don't like death is such a big, heavy thing that it's really hard to understand. And so at 7 years old, I remember whenever I had big emotions or felt overwhelmed, or if there was chaos or anything going on, I would always run to the barn and I would crawl into, we have these horse troughs where they have, where we can put hay. And I would crawl into them with hot tears streaming down my face. And I remember Maya and Diablo would come galloping up to me, and they would come and they would just be with me. And that was the most healing thing that any being, whether animal or human, could have ever done. Just the presence of not being alone, especially with big emotions. That was the most healing thing I had ever experienced. And so even using that in my coaching has been so profound, because horses, where they're prey animals, so they have their eyes on the sides of their head, similarly to deer and other prey animals, their nervous systems and their hearts and their brains are super wired so that way they can scan for threats. And then they also have the ability to really regulate very quickly afterwards. And so with horses, especially where their hearts are so big, I've seen research done where their electromagnetic fields are a lot bigger than people's. And so they're able to really help people regulate and come back to that full body presence, because horses mostly live from presence. They don't really have the ability to not live in the moment. And so, yeah, that's my favorite thing.
Yeah, I'm with that regulation and that presence, that somehow that the energy from the human and the horse somehow merge.
Yeah.
And then the magic happens and the healing. That is so powerful. Can you give us an example recently of somebody and a healing example that you've experienced with someone?
Yeah, I'll even share from myself. So with my wild Mustangs, even, I have a wild Mustang I've named Ruby, and she is extra sensitive in every way. She's very smart, very observant. And so with Ruby, she's not very food motivated like my other wild Mustang named Bonita. And so working with her has been so different, because I really have to, I feel it even in myself when I work with her. I have to have a regulated nervous system, and I have to have no attachment. Like my intentions can't be, like, for example, in the beginning when I would work with her, I tried to work with her like I did with Bonita. So what I would do to Ruby is I would go to hand her food, and I'd be like, okay, take the food from my hand so she could get used to me. And she wouldn't do it, because my intention was just take the food, right? Just take the food from my hand. Like, let's just, build this relationship, right? And I remember one of my mom's best friends had passed away, and I was working with Ruby, and I would extend my hand with the food, and I would say, just take it, right? And she could tell that I was avoiding the grief and avoiding the sadness of my mom losing one of her best friends. And so when I was out there with her, I dropped into the feeling, and I got friendly with the grief, and I was able to cry and move through my emotions. And after I sat with the grief and really felt it and moved through it, when I looked over at her and I offered the food again, she ended up taking it from my hand. And so that was a really eye-opening experience for me, where she can tell where I'm coming from. And so when I was like, oh, I guess I'll try giving you the food again, not expecting her to take it. And when I was able to better regulate and embody more of that full body presence, that's when she was willing to take food from my hand. So,
wow, wow. That is so powerful. Um, you know, I've been working with somebody who we've been talking about teams and energy and kind of clearing the field before you have meetings so that the energy you go in with is clean and then the room is clean. You know, clarity pops out because you don't have all your junk, you know, and you can do it. The leader can do it. The horse can do it. The human can do it. It doesn't matter who clears the energy so that you can have that connection. And that is so powerful that Ruby, knew you needed the nudge to, get the energy and the energy cleared and the regulation. Yeah. The horses are there for us to regulate our energy. I have a feeling dogs do it too.
I think so too. Yeah.
It's also interesting to me because what I hear when I hear you talking about that experience with Ruby was that you were able to bring your body to the state where you could actually communicate with her and she could communicate with you. So it's almost like you're learning to tune your body as an instrument, almost like a Rosetta Stone for the communication. You're learning their language and they're learning yours. And it's almost like you just opened up those lines of communication. And I wonder how you teach other people to do that, or how you would have horses teach other people to do that.
Yeah. And I will say, so with horse communication, it's really incredible how if you slow down and you listen, you can really communicate just through body language. So oftentimes, so I have the two horses that I work with clients is Maya, which is my 34-year-old best quarter horse, calm, collected, great girl. I love her so much. She's my heart. She's my world. She's my everything. And then the horse that I adopted, Claire, she's my more spicy chestnut Arabian horse. And so she definitely, like with Claire, she's more hot. So she loves more of the energy, while Maya kind of is more similar to my horse Bonita, more cool sided. And so they're more food motivated. They're very calm, very collected. While Claire is more hot, kind of like Ruby. And so with Claire, it's really interesting because Claire will totally test your boundaries. She'll come up, and she'll be like, I wonder if I can, push this person around. Or like when I do client work, I'll have them go through an obstacle course. With Maya tries to follow, she tries to listen. But with Claire, she's like, if you're not embodied and if you're like, oh, could you maybe move, she won't. And so with Claire, you have to be very clear in your communication, and same thing with the Mustangs. And that's something that I'm learning, that communication, as I'm going along. And for example, with Bonita, we had a really good Bonita for quite a while. She let me touch her with a broom. That way it was like a little bit of an extension. But she hadn't let me touch her belly just yet, or her feet. And I saw Bonita out in her little paddock area scratching her belly along the ground. And so I had offered to her, I had gone out there and I was like, I can scratch you for you. And I was like, if you let me get close enough, and so I had the broom with me. And so I started to scratch her belly. She loved it so much. She lifted up her back leg like a dog. Wow. I couldn't believe it. She loved it so much. And so she went from not really like letting me touch her with the broom a little bit along her back and along her neck, but then from that to I was able to, that same session, use my hands and scratch her belly and touch her legs and all over within a matter of like a couple minutes when she realized that I was listening. And then also she would point with her nose where she wanted me to scratch her. And then I had just recently posted this on YouTube where I was communicating with Ruby through body language where she wanted me to scratch. And so I would have a brush in my hand as well as like my open free hand. And as I would brush her or like scratch her, sometimes she would look back and she would touch my hand to say, "No, I want your hand to scratch me." And then she would point with her nose where she wanted it. And so being able to slow down and have that kind of communication, but it got to the point where now she thinks I'm a horse. And so now, like as I'm scratching her, she'll scratch my back. And so that's really funny for me. And so now I'm trying to teach her like sometimes horses when they have a really big itch, they'll use teeth because they have pretty thick skin. And so that's something that I'm working with her. Like I'm not a horse.
Yeah.
And so as I'm scratching her, if she never bites hard, but if she ever goes to use teeth, I just stop and I say, "Nope, we're not doing teeth." And then like she'll be like, "Oh, okay." Like I got a video of her where she looked at me like, "I'm so sorry." Like she didn't realize that I was like, "No, we're not doing that," right? And so she's starting to have that communication, what's okay, what's not okay, and also like being able to listen and slow down and scratch her places that she can't scratch on her own that she just loves. So it's really sweet.
That's fabulous.
Wow.
You know, this has such ramifications into communication in general.
Yeah.
You know, I'm thinking Robbie and I are both former teachers, and you know, you think of all those misbehaving kids and how really what's happened is people haven't heard them, haven't slowed down enough. And I love the way you describe, you know, personality type of hot and cool. I mean, that's so perfect, and it goes into some of those personality tests so well. You know, you have to be sensitive enough to intuit the communication style you're dealing with, open yourself up to it, listen, and then let the communication happen, and it calms people down. You're meeting a human need, a horse need. You're meeting a need. You know, the horse gets to be seen and heard, and you get to be seen and heard.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I see about 8 children's books and a bunch of communication protocols. That's where my mind always goes. But congratulations. When did you start realizing that you were so good? I mean, maybe it was with Maya, but when were you so good at listening? Because I have a hunch, even though Maya was open to your feelings, there was a point where you started to consciously listen to her.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think with animals, I think back to even being a kid, I feel like I've learned through trial and error and also like learned through being with Maya for so long. Like I can pretty easily look at Maya and kind of guess what she's thinking or feeling. And yeah, it's pretty, her and Claire are really fun. And then I think I've always had cats as well as a kid. And so with a cat, it's like a perfect example of if you touch them where they don't like, they'll let you know. And so same thing with like dogs and horses. They have different ways of letting you know. And so sometimes if you slow down, like with a cat, you know, either they'll bite or scratch you, that'll be like the most extreme, or they might just kind of move out of the way because they don't like the way you're touching them, right? And so with animals in general, I think back to all the pets that I've had, and I've definitely had some very spicy cats, some very, you know, calm horses, and just slowing down to see, oh, they don't like that. Like reading their body language is really huge. And so I feel like I've done that pretty naturally since I was a kid. Because I don't.
Yeah, you pay attention. Well, so this is another question about you, and have you gotten more skilled at listening to your intuition?
Yes, most definitely. I think that through listening to my heart, listening to my dreams, and giving myself the permission to follow them, it's helped clear so much muck out of the way. It's helped me see what's really truly important to me, and the permission to continue to go towards that has been life changing.
Yeah, yeah. So look into the future a little. What's next? Besides continuing to learn how to train those Mustangs or listen to them more fully.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think right now, what I'm working on is I'm currently growing my business, and so I'm working with a very few amount of clients, one-to-one, doing virtual sessions, and then I'm inviting them as a celebration and to help them step into living their wildest dreams. I'm hosting retreats on my family farm with my Airstream, and so that's something that I'm starting to share with a few select people, and if people are ready to invest in themselves, that's the way to really get towards being true to your heart. So that's something that I'm doing for my business. And then for me, I think I'm also just learning a ton of horsemanship skills, like you mentioned. And something I'm looking at stepping into is doing a training program so that way I can really learn how to listen. There's so much in horsemanship. I had watched Horse Whisperer as well as some other like old Western, old horse videos, and some of them I'm like, that's not how I want to go about it. Um, like in the Horse Whisperer, I'll speak to it. It's the pinnacle scene of the training is tying up the horse's legs to the point that he basically accepts death and gives up. And so that's kind of a nervous system that's like dorsal, it's just like collapse. The horse basically submits by accepting that you can take their life. And that's not like that's the kind of horsemanship that's been out there for quite some time, and that's not at all what I want for myself or for my horses. And so learning how to be a partner and communicate with them is what I'm working on. And there's some other horsemanship that I'm realizing I align more closely with, which is more like liberty work, which is choice based, or um, giving horses the option. For example, with Ruby, Ruby is still a little bit unsure when I extend my hand. And so, what I've been doing for her is above some easy to eat pieces of hay, I stick out sticks so that way they're above her. If she goes to eat food, she can choose to go where it's easier, but she has to let the sticks touch her. So that's more like choice based training, which is what I'm more in alignment with. And so I'm just learning into learning on horsemanship skills and how to really listen.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, if people are more interested in getting to know you and your business and your retreats coming up, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Yeah, the best way is I have my website, joleend.com.
Okay.
And on my website, I have, if you want to work with me, there's an application there. And then there's also, if you want to follow my YouTube, I just started filming. I just got a new camera that I'm excited to be using for my YouTube series of my process of gentling my Mustangs. And then I also have my Instagram and Facebook, which I keep very updated. I try to post every day. So yeah, if people want to stay in touch there, that's the perfect way to go.
Sure, that's good. Robbie, do you have any further comments or questions?
I'd like to know what your Instagram handle is so that we have that as well. And I guess my one of my final questions to you would be how, listening to how you are learning this communication style, I wonder, has it helped you in your interpersonal relationships with humans? And are there ways that you can teach others based on what you've learned and how you ask for what you need as well? Like a horse would let you know where they want to be scratched. Have you also personally, has that helped you learn how to ask for what you need? But how's that helped you in your interpersonal skills with humans?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one of the biggest things that I've learned for myself within my relationships is with which relates to horses is with horses it's very obvious when they're not regulated. So when their nervous system is not regulated, with the hotter horses that lean more Arabian, which is Claire and Ruby, their noses flare and they do. It sounds like a jet sound. Their breathing is like harsh and very labored, and their eyes. You can see the whites of their eyes. You can see when a horse is stressed, and um, you can see when they're in the sympathetic fight or flight nervous system state. And so for me personally, I've realized in my relationships with people is when they're in that kind of state, it's not productive to have communication because they need the time and space, or they need to be able to co-regulate with you or with the pet or with a loved one. They need having a conversation from fight or flight is probably not going to go well for anyone.
Yeah.
That's something I've learned when I see it in myself or when I see it in my partner or my friends or whoever. I'll say, okay, guys, I think that this conversation is not going to be productive at this point because we're in fight or flight or we're just not regulated. And I'll say, let's take some time and space to go regulate ourselves. Just go be present, go do what you need to do. Sometimes, people might just be hangry or they haven't drinking any water or things like that. That's been really huge. And then the other thing that you had talked about, your question was on, for me, what I've realized, the most helpful thing for me to better communicate my needs and things has been, I learned about the Enneagram test, and that has really helped me see my patterns from a more bird's eye view. And then what I've done is there's a book on the Enneagram, and it has the different levels of, like, the most healed version of yourself is level 1, the least healthy version of yourself is level 9. And you can kind of see where you show up in certain situations. So, in high school, I could be like, oh, I was definitely operating level 4 or 5. And in different moments, you can fluctuate. And so something that I've done for myself is I ask myself in situations how I can show up as level 1 or level 2 or somewhere in the healthy range, and how, because my pattern specifically had been over giving and over responsibility. And so sometimes I used to get it confused with love, like, oh, well, I love them, so I'll give them, everything. And something that I've realized too, like even with horses, especially with Claire, for example, if I just, give her food all the time, just freely, she'll become a little bit food possessive and start to push me around. And so I'm like, okay, I have to say, like, no, and stand firm in my ground. And that's what I've had to learn in my relationships too, is to say, oh no, I can't go drop everything right this minute to go help you with something. I can, I can help you in about 3 hours when I'm done with this podcast or something, right? Yeah.
Boundaries. Yeah.
Boundaries. I was just know that word that comes out.
Boundaries, and not feeling guilty about saying no. Yeah.
Right.
I love how you use the word regulation. I don't hear that enough in communication, for people to say, we both need to regulate our nervous systems. Maybe that will start coming because of all the brain-based research that's coming out. But it's a good word, and it makes, I think it is more kind of amiable to tell somebody, I need to go regulate myself. Maybe you can do the same. We'll have regulation rooms. And I love that. That's a good use of you've got great language in what you're working with, and it's very transferable. We just need to figure out how to transfer it. So, Jolene, we'll kind of start closing just by saying, what is a takeaway for you today out of our conversation?
I think seeing the correlation between communication with horses and humans is really powerful, and I think it's so needed and can be applied in so many facets of everyone's life.
Yeah.
And then embodying like the regulation piece, which is just a fancy word for just being present. I think really just embodying that is huge.
Yeah. Robbie, how about you? What's a takeaway?
Jolene, when you were talking about the horses just can be with you and that's their power, and that they have that presence. And so really they're holding space for you. And I think that that's such a lesson for us with each other, but with animals as well, because I have a huge ranch full of animals, and it is about that presence, and it's about holding space, and that's, they can do that, and we can learn from that. And I think that really, really resonated with me.
The holding space and giving room.
Yeah.
And I love the word presence too. That word is starting to come into the communication field. People are starting to use it. I, again, am going to reiterate, I just love your language and how it transfers and transforms communication. And it's been there all the time, and you're just bringing it out. And I'm excited to watch how you're growing and building new businesses, because that really is what you do. But you get to do it totally around what you love, and what makes your heart sing. So, Jolene, would you please send me those links and handles you talked about, and I'll get them in our page when I post this video. So, anyway, one last final question. What advice would you give somebody who's in the middle of a successful career and it's not making their heart sing?
Ooh. I think that what it comes down to is when we're kids, we love things without feeling like there's someone else that needs to give us the permission. And so I would say go back to the drawing board and just brainstorm your favorite 10 to 20 things as a kid, and see if you can, as an adult, give yourself the permission to start to do those things that lit you up as a kid now. And so that could be like, I know someone who loved roller skating, and so as an adult, he decided to take roller skating lessons, and he was the only adult. Everyone else was under 10, but he got the certification and everything. And that's like, when you give yourself the permission to go for the things you loved as a kid, that's when your life will just burst with so much joy.
Yeah. Oh, that's fabulous. Thank you so much, Jolene, for coming on with us, and we want you on again. And sometime check out what Robbie talks about with her ranch, because she's got a book out. Robbie, give us the name of your book one more time. Well, you did this time.
The Ranch Mystic's Guide to Practical Spirituality.
And it's not quite out yet, but it's coming soon.
Yeah.
And anyway, so thank you again. And we're going to sign off and say goodbye to everybody. But ladies, would you hang on so we can talk on the other side? Okay. Hang on. I got to shut this down.